is 5:30 p.m. in Vegas, and all of you have chosen to be here. That's pretty impressive. That's pretty impressive. We were talking earlier about what sort of turnout we would have, and I thought, 5:30 is not too bad. And then I realized all the partner parties start at 6, so we're going to try and cram as much good stuff in here to the first half of this as we can. Thank you all for being here. Welcome to reInvent. My name's Jeremiah Dooley, and today what we're going to talk about is total cost ownership. I'm going to bring up my colleague, Praveen Needham, here in a little while, and we're going to go through a couple things that I think are going to be pretty fun and things that we hear from customers all the time that we thought might be useful to package up and be able to share with everyone. From an agenda overview, we're going to do a couple things. No discussion of TCO, and any of you in here who have ever had a discussion of TCO know this to be true. No discussion of TCO is complete without defining our terms, talking about what do we consider TCO to be, how do we measure it, what are the metrics that we can use to track it over time. We're going to map some of those over into the AWS serverless spectrum. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the products and the ecosystem that we see customers adopting into quickly in order to do many things involved with business value, but particularly on the TCO side. We're going to dig into ECS and serverless containers specifically and talk about why that has been a really good focus point and fulcrum for customers who are looking to move workloads into AWS or who are looking to modernize workloads once they are on AWS. And then finally, Praveen's going to come up and we're going to talk about a phased migration journey. TCO is one of those tricky ones that where you start and where you end is going to be very different based on what type of customer you are, what type of workloads you have, your regulatory overhead. And so we wanted to give you a practical way of looking at where you are and where you can go and being able to measure what that looks like over time. When we talk to customers about business value, there are lots of different things that customers are trying to solve for. Sometimes customers are just trying to solve for cost savings. All we want to do is reduce infrastructure cost, right? I want to get me a savings plan, I want to get me a bulk discount, and all I want to do is achieve a certain percentage reduction in TCO as measured from a certain point in time. And everything that I do is trying to solve for that problem. Sometimes we're looking at staff productivity, we're looking at operational resilience, we look at business agility. Sometimes we can solve for more than one of these at a time. Sometimes by migrating platforms, by modernizing an app, sometimes we can get better operational resilience and better agility while also improving TCO. But we don't necessarily have to try to boil the ocean. We don't have to try to focus on all of these at once. We can look at each of them as incremental wins over time. When we talk to customers about adopting a serverless model, there are some things that they focus on that are clear wins for them, some things that the serverless model does for them that really impacts the bottom line for them. When we talk about why is that serverless model applicable to customers who are focusing on TCO, the first one is going to be the infrastructure fundamentals, right? Every application, no matter how modernized it is, no matter where it's running, has to have infrastructure underneath it that works, right? There's a picture of me doing a presentation from, 12, 13 years ago, and the only thing on the slide behind me, it just says infrastructure is dumb, right? It's not easy, it's really important, but the infrastructure part of it, doing it really well, doing it consistently, and being able to manage it over time is something that every one of these workloads and every one of these TCO discussions is going to take for granted. And the serverless model really moves that burden from you as the customer to us as the provider. Next, they want opinionated infrastructure, right? EC2 is the original server, right? It's the original server with an API in front of it. If you want to manage the type of instances that you're using, if you want to manage how dense your workloads are on those instances, you certainly can. As we move along this TCO journey, what customers are asking us for is more opinion, please. You see lots of customers, you see lots of workloads. Tell me the questions I need to be asking. Tell me what this is going to look like when I put it into production. And then finally, we need to channel site availability away from the people who are developing the applications. When we start to give you the ability, whether you have it already and need to reinforce it, or whether you don't have it and you want to create it, if we give you the ability to separate the site reliability and operations away from the people who are actually writing the code, what we see is a pretty exponential increase in availability, code quality, right? We're letting people do the thing that they are best at and giving them guardrails for the things that they take for granted that are going to be there for them. And the outcomes to that are pretty clear, right? We want to drive lower TCO, we want to improve performance and security, and we want to have greater agility. We want to deploy more often, we want to deploy with greater frequency, we want to be able to bring features to customers faster. And when we talk about customers moving to the serverless ecosystem, it's not just a product. There is a tendency when we say serverless that the first thing we think about is Lambda. And we think about Lambda because that was essentially an entire application space, an entire development paradigm that AWS created. And over time, what we've realized is the big value of Lambda is again going to be that opinionated way that we can deliver the infrastructure and allow people to focus on the service delivery side of it. We've taken that and used it to create an entire ecosystem full of products, whether that's your event bridges or your SQSs. And we've even pushed that into places where we have traditionally had customers manage the infrastructure themselves. And ECS is one of those that we'll talk about, right? Using Fargate to be able to say, here's a container platform, here's your orchestration tools, here's your scalability, here's all of your pieces. We'll take care of the hardware underneath it, right? You don't have to worry about bin packing. You don't have to worry about what instances you're using or what your rate plan is on those instances. We'll take that lifting off of you. And whether that's primitives, right? Whether that's your S3s and your EFSs and your Lambdas and your ECSs, or whether that's all of the peripherals that go around it, right? Being able to deploy databases and manage the databases, but not the infrastructure that's supporting it. Being able to deploy OpenSearch, being able to deploy some of SageMaker, some of the platforms that we can use to achieve business goals, but not have to worry about the whole stack that's underneath it. We also have a tendency when we hear serverless to have, and this holds true for Amazon as it does everywhere else, the idea that you have to choose one or the other, right? You're either in the serverless good for everything, or you're in the serverless not something that we want to adopt. And what we've tried to explain to customers is that this is not a zero-sum game. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is build the best applications we can for customers. So if we look at this as a graph of more or less opinionated, meaning Amazon is providing you the answers to some of the best practices. And then on the other axis, we look at what you manage, whether you manage more of that environment or less of that environment. What we have is a nice kind of up and to the right that can be taken on as a journey at any point by customers, but not all of it. No one's advocating we need to move everything to Lambda, and if you don't move everything to Lambda, it's not a modern application and you haven't finished modernizing. But where it makes sense, we say, we've got the traditional, if you want the least opinionated and you want to manage the most, that's what on-premise for. When we move that into an AWS context, that's what EC2 is for. And there are still hundreds of millions of workloads for which EC2 is the perfect answer. Once we get out of the I need hardware to run my workloads and we get into a little bit more abstracted, I need containers to run my workload, that's where ECS and Fargate comes in. And then once we get out of I don't even really need the container construct anymore, I just need a function to run the code. Or some combination of the three, we want to position this entire thing as these are all levers you can pull to get back to those business agility items that we were talking about at the beginning. And the proof of this, the proof that this is resonating with customers comes directly from those customers themselves. When we look at customers across lots of different industries, but particularly with customers who are coming from highly regulated financial services environments, what we see is that the numbers that they're giving us prove out the messaging that we're trying to provide. Whether it's future ready, cutting operation and infrastructure costs by 35%, by getting into more opinionated infrastructure and taking some of the burden of that infrastructure off of their teams, whether it's Lifomic, shrinking capital expenses and reducing consumption. Some of this is people moving out of data centers or not having on-prem availability that they used to have and being able to move and drive costs down while keeping things reliable and available. Or Amada, who reduced the computing costs by 30%. These total cost of ownership stories that are being built on top of that narrative of here's the portfolio, how opinionated would you like it to be, are real. And then it's not just the cost savings, right? We tend to, and The people who are asking us to write the reports for them tend to focus on how much money am I saving. What we end up doing with our customers is really having the discussion around how much money are you making by being able to deliver faster, by being able to scale more consistently, by being more secure. And so when we talk to the Liberty Mutuals or the Snoops of the world, where they are scaling automatically to hundreds of millions of transactions, or in the case of Snoop, they're a brand new environment that scales from 0 to 1 billion transactions in under 2 years. Like, these are the types of stories that we're trying to enable with that discussion. And one of the key parts of that, one of the things that's in the middle that is a good transition point between kind of the on-prem traditional environments and the, the fully serverless, where we would like to be in a best case scenario over time, is ECS. And ECS is a managed container orchestrator. And we try to break those two things down and explain what they mean. The managed part means it's managed by AWS. There are no cluster versions. There are no data stores to maintain or scale. There is a control plane, and you never see it, and you never have to worry about it. It's free to use on top of either the EC2 that you already have that you're managing yourself. Remember, we talked about the less opinionated side. Or using Fargate, which is going to be on the more opinionated side. It works with different compute types. And the compute type that we're seeing customers adopt increasingly is Fargate. How many of you are using ECS today? Oh, a good handful. How many of you are using ECS on Fargate today? Excellent. So Fargate is the serverless compute engine that ECS can consume sitting on top of it. So again, it's serverless and it's managed. So it's managed by AWS. There's no AMIs to maintain. There's no EC2 instances to provision. The scale and management of the control plane, we handle all of that. Fargate is where the containers run, right? So where the containers run can be an EC2 instance that you own and you figure out how many need to be on there. Or it can be a Fargate instance where you essentially pay for exactly the size of task that you need to be running, and we worry about all of the infrastructure that's underneath that. These two things together provide three things that customers have really come to us and said, this was what we were looking for. The first is that it's serverless. We get out of undifferentiated heavy lifting on the operational side. There's no value in the business, and there's no value to the end customer. Why are we continuing to pay those costs? When we move to ECS on Fargate, we can start to lift some of that burden. Second is that it's secure. It's isolated by design. It's patched and compliant. It's available in every secured zone that we offer as AWS around the world. And because we're not having any sort of, because it's not like a shared instance or anything like that on the EC2 side, we build that security in by default so that customers can run workloads of different types and different sizes and different levels of criticality side by side. And then third is going to be the savings. We can deploy these quickly. We can scale efficiently. ECS, the scalability side of ECS, we'll talk about here in a second, is pretty crazy. But we can scale efficiently and then automatically allocate compute either to the individual tasks or across multiple tasks as we need to. When I talked about huge numbers of customers being able to use this, over 65% of all new Amazon container customers use ECS. And where it says the majority of new ECS customers, after I submitted this deck, we got an actual number that came back. Over 70% of new ECS customers are running those workloads on Fargate. Right? So if of every new container customer that comes into AWS, if 65% of them are on ECS, and then of those 65%, 70% of them are on Fargate, you can kind of see that adoption cycle, right? Especially as Fargate evolves, like every AWS service. As it gets better, as it gets faster, as we get more capabilities built into it, there become less and less tasks that can't run on Fargate, which probably wasn't the case 5 years ago. Every week, we launch billions of tasks. Right? We launch tasks all around the world. We launch tasks in every region that we have out there. And we do that on behalf of customers, but we also do that on behalf of Amazon. ECS is a gigantic internal development platform for Amazon. So when you look at some of the biggest digital properties on the planet, whether that's Prime Video, whether that's the retail site, or even entire ECS or entire AWS products like SageMaker and AWS Batch and Poly and Lex. All of these have been built, scale, and customers are using ECS as the backend for that. They probably never know it. But that's how flexible this is. And where that really benefits you and where that really benefits customers is, I can almost promise you, no matter what company you're at, no matter what industry you're in, you're not going to be using a platform that you can outgrow. You're not going to be using a platform at a scale or at a performance level that we haven't already seen and solved for internally, and you get all the benefits of that. You get the benefits of that scale and performance and security, and all of those things that we go through over and over and over every day end up becoming part of the product that you get to take advantage of. So we've talked about, let's define the building blocks of TCO. We talked a little bit about some of that business value that we wanted to drive. We talked about the portfolio. We talked specifically about ECS and serverless and Fargate. And what I want to do now is I want to put this into the context of you as customers. And TCO is interesting because there is no defined start point and there is no defined goal. You start where you are. And that might be on-prem in a data center with no cloud resources and utilization whatsoever. That could be fairly mature and you're looking to drive more TCO savings or more business value into that where you are. And where you end is how far they will let you go. Some of that will be due to regulations, some of that will be due to staffing, some of that will be due to budget, but all of that's going to be unique to you. So what we've done here is we've kind of built an upside down, hierarchy of Maslow's cloud needs when it comes to TCO. And where we start at the top is the things that are easier to do. Not easy, because none of this is going to be easy, but easier to do, lower hanging fruit that can be used. And as we move down, we're driving more and more savings into that TCO number. Does that make sense? So we're going to go through a couple scenarios here, and I'm going to bring my colleague Praveen Edam back up. And Praveen works with customers every day on how to be able to implement some of the technology that we talked about and really be able to drive into the business side of it. And he's going to walk through some of those scenarios and what they could look like. And the hope is, as you're looking at the slides and listening to Praveen, you're seeing yourself. You're seeing your company and where you are and can start to think about, what's my next step? What's the step after that? Where is the logical place that I can end up? So again, it's 5:30 on a Wednesday. I'm impressed that everybody's hanging in here. Thank you for the time. And Praveen, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeremiah, for that mental model on how to look at total cost of ownership. But it looks like this audience already is pretty familiar with ECS. So that will make my job very easy. Hello, everyone. My name is Praveen Edam, and I am a solution architect as part of the financial services group here at AWS. Now, I've been supporting financial services customers for a few years now, and before that, I was in the financial services industry. With 15 years of experience, I realized very quickly how critical the financial applications are. I mean, just look at some of them. You have enterprise payments that take in trillions of dollars of payments every day, credit card systems, core banking, insurance claims, just to name a few, right? And the list can go on. And these are all very important for a well-functioning economy and us as customers, right? Now, here at AWS, what we are seeing is a lot of these applications are starting to migrate to the cloud. And I'm sure here in this audience, we have some people that already are going through these modernization journeys, if not at least planning for these journeys, right? So what is so unique about these applications? Now, for one, as I mentioned, stability. It is so important. I mean, how many times have you had to wake up at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning? There have been times where I had to join a call, and the CEO of my company, this is a Fortune 500 company, the CEO is on the call asking answers, right? So those are the kind of scenarios we can get into. So let's imagine you are the architect for a stock trading application. What are some of the key considerations, right? You want to make sure that you have very little data loss. So what I mean by that is, if a customer makes an order, it could be a buy or sell order, you want to make sure that that order is persisted, right? Even if, let's say, there is a data center completely, becomes offline, you want to make sure that that order has been persisted. And in that remote case where your application is down, you want to make sure that it is quickly, back up, right? So that is primary. And also looking at what kind of customer requests we get, the shape of the customer traffic that's coming in. 9:30, when the market's open, you get a burst of traffic, right? 4, when the market closes, the volume goes down. So your applications have to be able to manage this variability, right? So does that mean that in order to maintain these critical applications, you have unlimited budget? No. Not in this environment, not in this current economic environment. Everyone is trying to tighten their belts, right? So you as architects will be asked to make sure you are accounting for total cost of ownership, right? And that's what we see with a lot of our customers. And of course, security is also very important. Now, you might say that these non-functional requirements also apply to other domains, which is true. I'm looking at this talk is more from the financial services lens, but yeah, this can also be applied to other industries too. So when customers are beginning to do this modernization journey, right, where do they start, right? Now, let's look at it from the shoes of a customer. Now, imagine the customer is starting from an on-premises state. They're just trying to modernize, and the very initial step, let's look at how the on-premise state looks like and what the total cost of ownership is. Now, going back to this stock trading application, maybe you have some front end, right? It could be JavaScript, React, or whatever, and you have some microservices, some APIs. You could be deploying them in, let's say, a commercial on-premises Kubernetes environment or WebLogic or WebSphere. And for all of these, you would probably be paying some licensing cost, right? So when you look at the TCO, it's a combination of whatever Jeremiah mentioned earlier, right? It's a combination of your licensing cost, your build cost, your hardware cost, a lot of costs, right? So invariably, we see that in an on-prem environment, your TCO may be high. And if you really look at how do you provision the hardware in an on-premises environment, right? This can be both an art and a science. It's a trade-off decision. If you provision more hardware, then your total cost of ownership is increasing. If you provision less, then there are chances that when there is a disaster, you may not have applications online, right? So your scalability and high availability is constrained by how much hardware you're provisioning. So considering that state, what we see customers doing as a first step is doing a lift and shift. And this is what we recommend to customers, to migrate to one of the most foundational services, which is Amazon EC2. Now, a lot of customers we are seeing where, especially in the financial services space, they have a mandate to exit their data center by a certain time, right? And in those scenarios, this would be their primary step. And what we see in this phase is you typically don't make a lot of architectural changes. So if you have a monolith application, we suggest that you migrate it to EC2. If you're using a commercial Kubernetes orchestration system, you can bring that in and deploy it in EC2. So what's going to happen is, from a TCO standpoint, you're still paying for that licensing cost, but at least some of your management cost has reduced. Again, if you think about the shared responsibility model, right? You're not responsible for managing the physical data center, right? The cooling and things like that. However, you still have to manage the EC2 instances. You have to upgrade them. You have to patch them. So this is a first step towards your ultimate realization of low TCO and high scalability, but this is an important step. And this is what we are seeing customers do. Now, in terms of scaling, unlike a physical data center, where it'll probably take like 6 months to roll in new servers if, let's say, you don't have the right capacity. Here, you can get it much faster. So the scalability improves quite a bit. Now, if it is a very critical application, we certainly suggest that you deploy it in multiple regions, right? If you have requirements of 0 or almost 0 RPO and 0 RTO, then multi-region deployment would be something that a lot of financial services customers are considering. Now, this is the next phase, right? Which Jeremiah talked about, ECS, right? Now, ECS has 2 launch modes, EC2 launch mode and then Fargate launch mode. So let's look at customers that are using the EC2 launch mode, right? So this is where we are seeing that a lot of the financial services customers are adopting ECS and containerization in general. Now, you all probably realize containerization is a well-understood strategy nowadays for modernization because it provides consistency across your build time and deploy time. Now, unlike the previous phase where you didn't necessarily make a lot of architectural changes, if your application is not already structured to run in a containerized environment, that is the architecture effort you need to do, okay? So depending on how large your application is, this phase might, take that appropriate amount of time. Now, you don't have to make this change. This change doesn't have to be a big bang where you are migrating your entire application to container. It could be a phased approach further where you could have some pattern like a strangler pattern where progressively you're taking parts of your application and converting it into containerized service. So again, if you look at TCO here, you are giving up some of the management responsibilities that you had previously, and you're giving that to Amazon to manage. The control plane that Jeremiah referenced, ECS manages that, Amazon manages that control plane. And in terms of the total cost of ownership, you have to procure those EC2 instances and then give it to the ECS control plane, and that's going to deploy your applications. So you still are responsible for doing some of the patching, upgrades, the ARMY upgrades on the EC2 instances. However, a lot of the management responsibility has been offloaded. Now, you're also going to see a reduction in the licensing cost. Actually, if you're using, let's say, WebLogic, WebSphere, or a third-party container orchestration system, you're no longer paying licensing. ECS, you're not paying for ECS, you're just paying for the underlying compute. Now, in terms of scaling, you will be able to scale quickly and have high availability because the ECS control plane is going to make sure if one of the container goes down, it is going to make sure that it brings back up, okay? Now, let's look at the other launch type that Jeremiah talked about, which is the Fargate launch type. I think he went into a lot of great details there. Now, in this approach, you basically are not having to manage the EC2 instances. You're just offloading that responsibility further to AWS. And all you're saying is, my application needs 4 virtual CPUs and 8 gigs of RAM, or whatever that case may be. And it is the responsibility of ECS or Fargate to go and find the right compute and place it and give it to you. So just think about this. In the previous launch type, you had to manage, and if let's say you had a large EC2 and you're only consuming part of the EC2, you're still paying for that entire EC2. Whereas in the Fargate model, you're only paying for what you're using. So it becomes further lower management effort. Now, what we're seeing here is if you have some specific requirements, let's say you have a graphical processing unit requirements or some specific networking requirements, then customers are still doing ECS on EC2. But for the most part, almost 70%, I believe, is what Jeremiah mentioned, they are considering Fargate. Now, actually, I wanted to share a great customer story here. I've been working a lot with a large financial services customer, and they were using a third-party container orchestration system. And in less than 6 months, they were able to migrate to AWS Fargate. And by doing so, they were able to reduce almost 8 to 10 million of licensing cost for their third-party container provider. And that also brought them a lot of additional benefits in terms of scalability and high availability. Now, are they done with all their improvements? Have they achieved their TCO? No, they're still going on. They are still continuing to further improve. And the way you can improve further is by adopting certain techniques. The first technique that we are suggesting them to consider is dynamic scaling. Remember I talked about how you get variable traffic, customer traffic during the day, right? So this is where dynamic scaling can help. ECS Fargate provides a few different options. You can scale based on a particular target. So let's say if you want a CPU at 70%, if that's your scaling metric. If you reach that metric, then ECS is going to scale, going to add additional tasks, right? Similarly, you can have scheduled scaling, where at a particular time of the day, you can scale your application. Another way to also look at reducing TCO, we talked about 2 regions, right? Where let's say if your first region is your primary region, that's where all your customer traffic is coming. And you have a disaster, a region 2, which acts as the DR region. Are you going to carry the same replica of your region 1 in region 2, even if the customer traffic is not coming in? This is where some of the customers we see, they're actually going with a lower volume. And then when they have to migrate the traffic to the disaster region, second region, that's where they scale their application. They scale their tasks to the level that sustains the application. So this will, again, greatly reduce their total cost of ownership. Now, ECS also provides additional tooling. I don't know whether you've heard of AWS Compute Optimizer. So it also offers suggestions, recommendations on how it will look at your usage patterns and then provide you recommendation on what is the correct size for your tasks. So that's another great option to look at. Fargate Spot, if you're familiar with Spot, that's comes at a much cheaper cost. So that is also an option that you can consider. Now, we see customers saying, is scaling fast? Can it really scale if the demand comes up? So we recently launched something called seekable OCI, right? There have been other talks on this topic. I would certainly suggest you to look at it. But this will greatly improve your task startup time. Okay? So this phase may be the comfort zone for a lot of the customers, right? They are using Fargate, they've done dynamic scaling, and total cost of ownership, is under control, and their application scalability and high availability has increased. But our customers ask, is there more we can do? And we listen to our customers, and we suggest that they can consider serverless functions. Now, in fact, some of the large financial services customers, they have a publicly stated goal of being serverless first. Now, you might say that we just invested all this money in a containerization ecosystem. We have CI/CD pipelines, right? Why do we want to go to Lambda? Well, Lambda actually also supports container images. So you don't have to make a complete change to your architecture or your CI/CD pipeline or your developer experience. Okay? Now, there could be a subset of use cases where Lambda, now again, I'll step back a little bit. Let's look at TCO analysis in this case. When you contrast this Lambda use case with ECS Fargate, you're not paying based on how many tasks of your application, how many containers of your application you've deployed, but you're really paying based on how many customer requests you're getting. So that's a different model. So if your application has a traffic pattern that supports pay for requests, that is better for pay for requests, then Lambda would likely be cheaper. But we certainly suggest that you do cost modeling, where you look at different customer traffic patterns and see whether Fargate would be cheaper or Lambda would be cheaper for you. Now, there are a subset of customer scenarios where App Runner could also be a service that you could consider. Now, App Runner is built on ECS. And this is great when customers say, we have a small application. We just want to bring our code and let AWS manage everything. That means, they want a fully integrated CI/CD pipeline. They want fully managed operations. They want automatic load balancing, right? They may not care so much about all the customization that AWS Fargate offers. So in those cases, App Runner would be a great fit. So let's recap. So going back to the inverted pyramid that Jeremiah discussed. In the very first step, you basically are migrating to Amazon EC2. You're not making a lot of changes. You are still incurring a lot of the third-party licensing and the operation cost, but at least it's the first step for your subsequent modernization effort. And then you can look at Amazon ECS, where you can not pay for the licensing cost and increase scaling capabilities. And then customers tend to look at AWS Fargate to further reduce their operational overhead. And if you want to improve your developer costs, developer onboarding costs further, then you can certainly consider Lambda and AppRunner. So quick takeaways. With serverless containers, you'll get the reduced TCO that we talked about, immense scaling, the innovation, and certainly boosting the skills of your developer and making for a better developer experience. With that, I'll invite Jeremiah back on. Jeremiah, I know it's pretty late, so what do you suggest?
Yes. Well, first of all, before we go any further, thank you all for being here. And second of all, I would like to point out that what you just heard was the first time Praveen has ever presented at reInvent. And so before we get done here, I would like all of you to give him a good hand for that. Well done. Thank you. This discussion at TCO is one, obviously, is going to be unique for everybody in the room. When we look at the next slide, our contact information, go ahead and advance to the next slide. Our contact information is down here at the bottom. We're happy to have these conversations regardless of the workloads you're running, regardless of the verticals that you're in. We will make sure that we find the resources that you need. We'll make sure that we get the right people in the room to be able to have the discussions that